Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So this month, as you're probably aware, is the month of Vesak, when we celebrate the birth, enlightenment and parinibbana, passing away of Lord Buddha. And tonight I'd like to talk about one of the epithets or names that the Buddha himself used to describe himself, and that is the name, the Tathagatha. And I don't want to go into any great discussion on the Pali, but just to get a sense of what this means in terms of how it affects us. Because the translation that's usually given for the Tathagatha is the English rendering of the Pali phrase, the thus gone one. And that doesn't mean much to us. We can't make much sense out of that. And so what I would like to transliterate it to an English equivalent that means something to us is, he did it. And by that I mean he found the way out of suffering to complete peace and happiness, to enlightenment. And it's actually quite a powerful rendering if we think of how excited we get when we see that someone's done it, whatever it is that we think is really great, whether they've managed to run faster than anyone else has ever run, or climb a mountain that no one else has climbed, or any of the feats that we think are really great, that we get really excited about. Or even if we've accomplished something, we've done it, we've succeeded, we've managed to do what's necessary to accomplish the task. And that is the rendering really of the Tathagatha that I think means something to us, particularly as we contemplate this aspect of the Buddha as the one who shows us the way. That the Buddha did it for himself, solved his problems, but we have to solve our own problems. We have to do it ourselves. And fortunately for us, because the Buddha left us this wonderful teaching, we have the instructions that we can follow to accomplish what he accomplished. But it's very powerful just to contemplate that without those instructions we would still be so lost. Because even though we have the instructions, and even though we have the example of not only the Buddha but many others who followed these instructions before us, we still haven't done it. We do need the teacher to show us the way, to keep pointing us in the right direction, because it's so difficult for us, even with the help, to see what the Buddha saw, to experience what the Buddha experienced. Still, we haven't done it. And so one of the things that we contemplate on this Vesak time is just how fortunate we are that we have the Buddha as our teacher, and that it's only because of his arising in the world that all of this is possible here today, what we're doing here today, what we've been able to accomplish so far in our practice. And the Buddha wasn't discovering something that wasn't available before he was born. The truth which he's pointing out was there, but we couldn't, if we were there, we didn't see it. Beings up until that time weren't able to see it. It's not something that he invented. He is just simply showing us something, a reality that is here right in this moment. But it still eludes us. We still haven't seen what he saw. We still haven't understood what he understood. And this being able to look outside the box, look outside our own conditioning, is what we can really appreciate, that the Buddha provides us with that guidance. I'd just like to give you an example of how hard it is to see something unless someone shows it to us, unless we learn it from someone else. We know this with children growing up. They have to be shown how to do things, what things are. They have to be guided. But it's very hard to find that chink in the wall unless someone shows us. So there's a story that I usually use in another context, which is about someone who dies and goes to heaven, or so they think. And they think it's heaven because this shining being escorts them into this huge banquet hall. And they think, wow, I've done better than I thought I was going to do. I've made it. Here I am in heaven. And so they walk into the banquet hall, and sure enough, the tables are laden with food, and they're invited to take a seat at the table. And just as they sit down, someone comes from behind them and puts a splint on their arm so that they can't bend their elbow. And when they sit down, they sit at this table laden with food. But when they stretch out their arm to take the food, they can't bend their arm to get the food into their mouth. And it's so frustrating, and they try any way they can to make the food reach their mouth. They bend their head back as far as it will go. They try to throw it from the wrist, the end of their arm, into their mouth. And I've actually done this as an exercise with children, and that's the first thing they try and throw it up and catch it as it comes down. It's very difficult to do. And even if we ask the adults there, is there another way of accomplishing it? Everyone tries to think, how can we do it? We can throw it up higher, or we can move faster, or it just seems impossible. And as this person looks around the room to see how he can learn the trick, he sees that everyone is in the same situation, moaning and groaning because this wonderful food is on the table and they can't get it into their mouth. And he suddenly realizes, this can't be heaven. This is more like hell. And looks around at the shining being, and the shining being says, come with me. And as he walks away, the splints fall off his arm, and he thinks, wow, now I'm really going to heaven. He's escorted into another banquet hall, and same thing, the tables are laden with food. It's wonderful. This is really it. And just as he goes to sit down at the table again, someone comes up behind him and puts splints on his arms. And again he can't bend his elbows. That sinking feeling, the same thing, what's going to happen? Again tries, can get the food, can touch the food, can reach it, but can't get it into his mouth. And then he notices, well, there's no screaming or groaning here, and he starts to look around. First he was just absorbed in the food in front of himself, but then he looks around and he sees something amazing. Everyone is being fed. But instead of trying to put the food into their own mouth, everyone is feeding the person sitting next to them, taking the food, extending their arm and feeding the person sitting next to them. and that's how everyone is getting fed. Now usually I tell this story to show how important it is that we learn to cooperate, and how wonderful it is when we can think not just for ourselves, but we can think how we're going to work together with others so that all of us can get our needs met. But when I was telling this story recently, it struck me again how important it was that he went into another room where there were people who showed him what to do. They showed him by example. Instead of just doing it, trying to get the food in your own mouth, there's an alternative. Look outside the box. Look outside your self-centered view of things. Now, when I first read that story, I couldn't think of how the person was going to get fed. It wasn't until I read the punchline that they were feeding each other that it struck me, well, of course, it's obvious. That would be sensible. But without having the example, very hard to think that one up on our own. And that's why it's so important to have the teacher, why it's so important to have the Buddha, because what the Buddha points out is obvious once we have it pointed out to us. He pointed out the fact, for example, that everything that comes into being is impermanent. It's only temporary. It arises, stays for a while and passes away. We've heard that so often and we think, well, yeah, I know that, but we still don't really know it. But now it's a bit more obvious to us than it was previously. The Buddha points out that this body, which we take to be me, which we take to be mine, which we take to be something that I control, I can do with as I like. That's not the truth. We know that this body is actually just a manifestation of nature. We're borrowing it from nature. It follows its own laws, not our wishes, not our hopes. We can't make it stop at age 25 while we're still looking pretty spunky and say, this is good enough, I'll keep this for the rest of the time I'm here, while we've still got the energy that we enjoy to get things done. We can't do it, even though we say, well, this is me, this is mine. It's not really. And it's so obvious. But how we fight against it, we resist it, we refuse to see it. We refuse to acknowledge it. And so we need the teacher to point these things out and to show us how we can start to approach these things and understand them at a deeper level. Not just to be smarty pants, but so we can start to live our life in accordance with truth, not in accordance with delusion. The ignorance that the Buddha talked about wasn't the fact that we're not smart, we're not educated, we don't know how to do things. The ignorance that the Buddha talked about was the fact that we still resist acknowledging these truths and these realities. We still get surprised when we hear that someone has died because we just don't like to think about death. And yet death is obviously something that comes with being born for all of us. Now, the reason why we contemplate that and get used to it and understand it as a fact is so that we can make best use of the time we've got now. Realize how precious this life is. How important the people are that we're with right now, because we don't know when. We're not going to be together again.